Hello there, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Margaret. How are you doing? I'm very glad to have you today. And our topic is food chain. Well, here we are going to talk about man's activities in his environment, man's relationship with his environment, man's interaction with his environment, what is man's environment made up of, what are the organisms in man's environment, the food that man eats, who are the producers, the consumers, or the decomposers. So what is food chain? Food chain is the flow or the transfer of energy in form of food from one organism to the other, usually from the producer to the decomposers. So how is this so? The producers make use of the energy from the sun to manufacture food, which goes down the food chain. So when you take a look at this picture, you can see the flow of energy or the transfer of food from one organism to the other. This transfer or the flow of food is represented by these arrows that you see here. That's how the food is being transferred from one organism to the other. So that takes us to the trophic levels of a food chain. There are certain positions occupied by organisms in the food chain. So these positions are called the trophic level. So what is a trophic level? Trophic level is the position occupied by organisms in a food chain. So these certain positions, they refer to the rules, the responsibilities, or the functions of each organism in a food chain. This is to say that the organisms can be a producer, some can be a consumer, while some are the decomposers. So let's take a good look at them. We have the producers, that's number one. This is the first level in the food chain, and they are usually called the autotrophs because they have the ability to manufacture food using the sun's energy. This process is called the photosynthesis. So these are usually the producers are usually the plants or the grasses. So when you take a look at man's environment, you can find some plants around the environment or the grasses around the environment. Most of the foods that we eat come in form of plants like the beans, rice, yam, orange, guava, etc. They all come in form of plants. When they are being cultivated, they grow in form of plants, and then when they are harvested, the food is being taken away. Then you can also see some animals that feed on grasses. So these are what we call the producers. And then the other producers, and we have the phytoplankton, the cyanobacteria, algae, and the green plants. So the second, we have the consumers. This is the second level in the food chain, and they're usually the largest organisms. They make up most of the living organisms in the ecosystem or the environment. So they depend on the producers for their own food because they don't have the ability to manufacture their own food. So they depend on the producers for the food they manufacture. These consumers of two groups. We have the primary consumers. The primary consumers are usually the herbivorous animals. You can see them around the environment feeding on grasses or plants, directly on grasses or plants. Especially we have the goats, the mouse, the grasshoppers, etc. Then we have the secondary consumers. These are usually called the carnivorous animals because they feed on other animals for their own food. So when you take a look at the animals world, you can see that most animals feed on each other. They devour each other for food. Like if I refer you to the Discovery Channel on DSTV, you can see the wild animals, they feed on each other for food. And then a typical example of a consumer too is man, that's the carnivorous animal, is man. You can see man feeding on different types of animals like chicken, lion, cats, snakes, etc. Then we have the scavengers. The scavengers feed on the carcasses of dead organisms. So they are known as the scavengers. Example, we have the vultures and the hawks. Then 4, we have the decomposers. These are called decomposers because they have the ability to break down the dead organisms to convert the organic materials to inorganic materials, thereby enriching the soil nutrients. So this increases the fertility of the soil, which helps in the growth of plants that the producers feed on. So when you take a look at this picture, you can see the producer, which is a grass, the primary consumer, which is a grasshopper, the frog, which is a secondary consumer, the snake, the tertiary consumer, and the hawk, which is the final consumer. Then we have the fungi or the bacteria, which are the decomposers. So here, the final consumer and the tertiary consumer, they are all under the secondary consumers. Some people can decide to split them this way, while some can just generally call them the secondary consumers. So here you can see the flow of energy going from the grass. That's the grasshopper feeds on the grass, the frog feeds on the grasshopper, the snake feeds on the frog, the hawk feeds on the carcass of this dead snake. And then when these organisms die, you can see the fungi or the bacteria, they all act on the dead organisms, thereby converting them from organic material to inorganic material, which enriches the soil and adds nutrients to the soil, so which helps in the growth of the grasses. So that is how the food recycles in a food chain or in an environment. So when you refer to this picture, you can see that there are certain organisms in a food chain. Certain organisms are being fed by different types of organisms. So when these organisms increases in number, it tends to multiply the food chain, leading to what is called a food web. Here you can see that the grasses are being fed by both the mouse and the grasshopper, and not by either of them. Then you can also see that the grasshopper is being fed by both the frog and the bird, and not by either of them. You can also see that the frog is being fed by both the owl and the snake, and not by either of them. Then here the mouse is being fed by both the owl and the fox, and not by either of them. The rabbit too is being fed by the fox, both the fox and the hawk, and not by either of them. Then you can also see that the rabbit also feeds on the grass, and not by only the mouse and the grasshopper. So this is what we call multiple food chain. As the number of organisms increases, the food chain multiplies, and this can lead to what is called a food web. And that will be our next topic. Thank you very much for your time, and have a lovely day. To have access to the notes, you can pause at intervals. Goodbye.